There are two questions women may ask that sound completely innocent, but the real question behind them runs a lot deeper. Are you actually the kind of man they can trust and build something with? Topic 1. What are you looking for right now? When a woman asks a guy, "What are you looking for right now?" a lot of men feel like they have to come up with the perfect answer. Some say they want something serious because they think that's what she wants to hear. Others say they're just seeing what happens, trying to sound laid back. But there's something way more important going on in that conversation. She might be trying to figure out whether this guy actually has clarity about his own life and about the kind of relationship he genuinely wants. A guy can say he's looking for someone special and still come across as desperate not to be alone. Another guy can say he's not in a rush to jump into a relationship, but still radiate calm, purpose, and maturity. The difference isn't just in the words, it's in the energy behind them, in how well what he says lines up with how he actually lives. That's why a simple, honest answer usually hits a lot harder than some line he rehearsed to make a good impression. Picture a guy saying, "I'm open to a serious relationship, but I'm not trying to force one. I'm focused on building a good life, and if I meet someone who fits into that life, I'd like to see where it goes." There's a sense of security in that answer, because he's not begging to be chosen, and he's not trying to convince her he's some perfect guy. He knows what he wants, but he also knows a good relationship has to happen naturally. And once a woman picks up on that, an even more interesting question comes up. What exactly is going on in this guy's life that she might actually want to be part of? Topic 2. What does your life look like when no woman is around? One of the most revealing things a woman can find out about a man comes up when she starts asking about his life outside of relationships. What does he do on weekends? Who does he spend time with? What does he like to do when he's alone? What are his plans for the next few years? On the surface, these sound like casual questions, but there's a deeper one hiding underneath. Does this guy actually have a life of his own? Or is he just waiting around for a woman to start living? And that difference, small as it seems, can completely change how she sees him. A guy who has his own life doesn't need to turn every date into some kind of performance to impress. He can talk about his job, his friends, that hobby he's been into for years, a trip he's planning, or just how much he enjoys a quiet night at home. Think about a guy who works during the week, trains, keeps in touch with a solid group of friends, reads, travels when he can, and has personal projects that genuinely excite him. When a woman steps into that kind of life, she's not filling some void. She's adding to a life that already exists. And interestingly, that creates a completely different feeling than the one you get from a guy who seems like he needs someone just to feel whole. That's why guys who are constantly chasing attention often end up giving off more neediness than they realize. If every conversation revolves around women, dates, getting rejected, or the last person who left him on red, it's hard to hide that his emotional life is running on outside validation. Meanwhile, the guy who can casually say, "I've been working on a project lately," or "My friends and I are planning a trip," is showing off something way more valuable than an attempt to sound interesting. He's showing that there's a life happening even when no woman is watching. And that leads straight into another question that can reveal even more about him. Not just how he lives when he's alone, but who he really is once someone starts asking more personal questions. Topic 3. What she's really sizing up. When a woman asks these questions, the guy usually puts all his focus on what he thinks he should say and completely misses the more important part, what his behavior is communicating while he's answering. Sure, she's hearing the words, but she's also picking up on his tone of voice, how calm and secure he seems, and even what he avoids saying. It's like looking at an iceberg. The answer is the part above the water, while values, maturity, and emotional stability are hiding right underneath. And it's exactly that hidden part where a real impression starts to form. For example, a guy might say he wants a healthy relationship, but then spend 20 minutes ranting about every woman who's ever let him down. He might say he's happy being single, but check his phone every 2 minutes to see if someone texted back. He might talk about trust but flip his whole personality the second he senses she's losing interest. These little contrasts matter because they reveal consistency, or the lack of it. A secure man doesn't need to prove he's secure. The way he talks, disagrees, listens, and stays calm already speaks for him. And there's an even subtler difference here. A woman isn't necessarily trying to figure out if he can give her the answer she wants to hear. A lot of the time, she's trying to see if his actual life matches up with what he says he wants. If he talks about commitment, is there emotional space for it? If he talks about purpose, is there any real direction behind it? If he says he values a healthy relationship, does he actually know how to set boundaries and respect hers? Because at the end of the day, words can make a good first impression, but patterns of behavior are what build trust. And once trust enters the conversation, there's a mistake that can make a guy start reading a normal interaction, like it's some totally different kind of game. Topic 4. The mistake of seeing tests everywhere. There's a mistake a lot of guys make right around the time they start learning about attraction. They start seeing a test in literally everything. She asks about his last relationship. He thinks he's being tested. She takes a while to text back. He thinks it's some kind of game. She asks what he's looking for. He starts hunting for the right answer. Little by little, a conversation that's supposed to feel human turns into some kind of oral exam, like there's a hidden panel of judges just waiting for him to mess up. And once he falls into that mindset, he loses something way more important than the perfect answer. He loses being natural. The problem is that trying to decode every single question can make a guy way too calculated. Instead of listening, he's thinking about what he should say next. Instead of sharing an experience, he's looking for a way to sound more dominant. Instead of getting to know her, he's worried about not getting rejected. An emotionally secure man does the opposite. He answers honestly and pays attention to context. If she asks, "What are you looking for?" he doesn't need to give a 15-minute speech or pretend he doesn't care. He can just explain what he's after and keep the conversation going. Security isn't about controlling the interaction. It's about not needing to control every little detail of it. And here's a mindset shift that can honestly free a lot of guys up. He's being interviewed, sure, but he's also doing some interviewing of his own. When a woman asks about his life, he can pay attention to how she reacts to his answers, what her values seem to be, and whether there's any reciprocity going on. If she shows genuine curiosity, actually listens, and shares her own story too, that's a real conversation. If it feels like a one-sided evaluation the whole time, that's important information for him too, because the goal was never supposed to be passing her test at all costs. It's figuring out whether two grown adults can build a real connection without turning it into a competition against each other. And that's exactly why, when these questions come up, how he answers can matter just as much as what he actually decides to say. Topic 5. How to answer with confidence, not a script. When a woman asks a question that feels important, a guy doesn't need to scramble to impress her. Honestly, the harder he tries to find the perfect answer, the more likely he is to sound fake. A strong answer is usually simple, specific, and true. If she asks what he's looking for example, he can say he's interested in meeting someone he respects, is attracted to, and shares compatible values with, without turning that into some marriage proposal on the first date. The goal isn't to say something irresistible. It's to show that he knows who he is, what he wants, and where he's at in life. There's also a huge difference between confidence and arrogance. An insecure guy might try to compensate by saying stuff like, "I don't chase women," or "Women are always trying to get my attention," thinking that'll make him sound desired. But a lot of the time it backfires completely. It comes off like he's trying to convince someone he has value. A genuinely secure man doesn't need to advertise his own worth like he's selling a house. He shows it naturally. If someone asks about his plans, he talks about them. If someone asks about relationships, he answers with maturity. If he doesn't know something, he admits it. There's no strength in pretending to have all the answers. A good rule of thumb: The answer should sound like something he'd say even if he wasn't trying to win anyone over. If he likes his routine, he can explain why. If he's building a career, he can talk about what drives him. If he wants something serious, he can say so without embarrassment, but also without rushing it. And most importantly, he doesn't need to turn the conversation into a highlight reel of his own qualities. The more comfortable he gets with his own truth, the less he needs to go looking for approval. But here's the interesting part. Once a guy starts operating like this, he stops walking into every date wondering if he'll be picked, and starts realizing he also has to decide who actually deserves a place in the life he's building. Topic 6. You're choosing to, not just waiting to be chosen. There's a quiet shift that happens once a guy stops treating every date like a chance to prove his worth. Instead of constantly thinking, "Did she like me?" he starts asking, "Do I like who I am when I'm around her?" It sounds like a small change of wording, but it completely changes the dynamic. Because when a guy is desperate to be chosen, he tends to hide his flaws, agree with everything, and put up with things he normally wouldn't. He's not really getting to know a woman, he's auditioning for the role of boyfriend. A more mature man understands that attraction isn't a contest to see who can win whose approval. He's observing too. How does she treat people who can't do anything for her? How does she react when things don't go her way? Is she genuinely curious about his life? Or does she only talk about herself? Do their values line up? Is there respect, good humor, and give and take? Picture a guy who realizes, during a date, that there's chemistry, but their life goals are completely different. He doesn't have to keep going just because he finally got the attention he'd been wanting. Knowing when to say, "We're not a match," is its own form of self-respect. That doesn't mean he should be cold, arrogant, or act like no woman is ever good enough. Quite the opposite. A secure man can show interest without letting that interest turn into dependency. He can text after a good date, give a genuine compliment, and make it clear he'd like to see her again, without spending the whole night refreshing his phone like his happiness is trapped inside it. Once he's built a life with purpose, relationships, interests, and goals of his own, a woman stops being some kind of rescue and starts being a potential partner. And that shift sets up the most important question of all. What happens when a guy stops trying to look like the right man and actually starts becoming him? Topic 7. The real test is who he is when he's not trying to impress anyone. At the end of the day, the real test doesn't happen when a woman asks a tough question. It happens in the small moments when a guy thinks nobody's watching. It's in how he treats the waiter, how he handles disagreement, how he talks about an ex, or how he deals with rejection. That's when his real personality starts showing through. A guy can pick the perfect words on a date, but it's hard to keep up an act for very long. Sooner or later, real life gives away whatever the talk was trying to hide. That's why these two questions are really just the surface. Underneath them, it's actually pretty simple. She wants to understand who she's dealing with. Does he have direction? Is he okay being alone? Does he respect other people? Does he take responsibility for his own mistakes? Does he know what he wants without needing to control everything around him? A guy doesn't have to be perfect to give off those qualities. In fact, admitting he's still working on some part of his life can show way more maturity than pretending he's already got it all figured out. And maybe this is the part a lot of guys don't expect to hear. The best way to pass any test isn't studying women, memorizing lines, or learning some psychological trick. It's building a life where his answers are true, simply because they're part of who he's actually become. When there's purpose, character, independence, and peace with himself, he doesn't need to convince anyone he's the right guy. His actions start speaking before he even opens his mouth. But there's one last question worth sitting with. If someone watched your life today, with no explanation from you at all, what would they say about the man you really are? Conclusion. In the end, maybe the biggest lesson from these two questions isn't learning to give better answers to women. It's learning to live in a way that makes your answers naturally strong. A man who knows what he wants doesn't need to invent a personality to seem interesting. A man who's built a life of his own doesn't need to fake not needing anyone. And a man who knows his own worth doesn't walk into a relationship begging to be chosen. He walks in ready to find out whether two lives are actually compatible. So it's worth asking yourself an uncomfortable question. If a woman watched your life for a full week, with zero explanation from you, what would she walk away thinking? Would she find a man with direction, purpose, and peace of mind? Or would she find someone hoping a relationship will fix what he still hasn't fixed on his own? And when a woman asks what he's looking for, or what his life looks like without her, is he answering with the truth, or with whatever he thinks she wants to hear? From here on out, instead of trying to figure out how to pass the tests, he can start building a life that doesn't need defending. Set goals, take care of your body, build real friendships, keep learning, protect your own peace, and have the courage to say no when something doesn't line up with your values. Because attraction might open the door, but character, direction, and maturity are what decide what happens once that door swings open. And maybe that's the real challenge here. Not trying to become the man a woman would pick, but becoming a man he'd actually be proud to be. If this video made you look at your relationships a little differently, drop a comment. Which of these two questions do you think reveals more about a man, and why? And if you want to keep learning about confidence, relationships, attraction, and how to build a stronger life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're still building this community, and we want to hit 1,000 subscribers with men who genuinely want to grow.